Hey everybody, it's your favorite water cooler movie chatter-upper guy, Dave the Klone, back again with another installment in the 15 Minutes of Movie Memory Madness podcast. That's right. Before we get too far in, before we go beyond filling the cup of water from the water cooler, getting a damn fine cup of coffee, you'd think that I'd be sponsored by Damn Fine Coffee, if there is such a Damn Fine Coffee. This is a Twin Peaks reference for anyone who doesn't get it. I know you've already smashed the like, the subscribe, the bell icon, all the things that you're supposed to do with this thing to make sure we keep coming through from me to you. Who is who and what do you know? Yeah, great, that doesn't rhyme. In any case, welcome back. Let's take a break from the mundanity of the mundane. The mundanity of the mundane. Let's take a break from whatever it is that we occupy ourselves with to talk about more movies. You're talking to a guy who grew up on movies, although I have to say these days I'm seeing the light with other friends of mine who have like cutoff times. Like, yeah, I loved movies up until, say, this particular year, and then everything after that has been sort of recycled hot garbage over and over and over again, that it's amusing to watch people fight over online because all it does is show how small the perspective has gotten, how low the bar for quality has become. The things that are celebrated are so disappointing to somebody who's been around for a couple decades now and has seen the ebbs and flows and peaks and valleys, almost like a mountainous landscape being traversed by some Native Americans and their adopted white brother. I'm talking about Last the Mohicans, for everybody who's already reaching for the stage hook to pull me off for becoming insensitive already. Let's chill the fuck out and go back to 1992, where Michael Mann made a period piece that was like, again, everything pre-94 is where Dave was developing mentally as a film aficionado. So I didn't 100% know why I loved this movie so much. In fact, it was sort of, I think it was on the heels of Dances with Wolves, right? So like just prior to turn of the century, the last decade, coming out of everything that had been sort of building to this point. The early 90s was really like a big time for historical period pieces that were like in epic proportion, epic scale period piece films. And I imagine it was sort of like this is our last push before we change over, like back then, even going further back into the 1980s, like we thought the year 2000 was going to be like, okay, the flying cars are going to show up, the aliens are going to arrive, time travel is going to be invented, interstellar travel is going to be invented for us. We thought like 2000, just because it was the click over into the new millennium, that like things were going to be light years ahead. And so looking back at it now, it makes sense that like we entered into that final chunk, that final decade of the previous century, thinking let's really look back at how far we've come. Let's go back to pre-indoor plumbing and say, look at how much that's changed in about 100 years. I think like the title card puts this in the 1700s. This is like French and Indian War, pre-Revolutionary War. And for all those out there who don't like history, Revolutionary War, we're talking 1776, right? And earlier, a few years earlier, this was 1770. French and Indian War was a decade maybe before. Because I believe it said 1747 on the title card at the beginning of this movie, but I could be wrong. So if I am, please email in hollow9podcast@gmail.com, the word hollow, the number 9, INE, podcast, all one big word, @gmail.com. 15 minutes, Last the Mohicans, this is your time to shine. So when we think about the Michael Mann movies we've already talked about, when we think about Michael Mann's filmography in general, this is one I always have to remind myself that he directed, because it kind of feels like this guy's forte was definitely in like the sort of slick criminal neo-noir world that was being built during the sort of excess and neon and commercialism of the 80s, right? So you've got Thief, you've got Manhunter. Eventually, when we hit 95, he's got Heat, so that'll be the movie he did right after this movie. But we have to keep remembering that there's movies in there like The Keep, and then there's like the TV, but then there's the TV show Miami Vice, which was sort of, I think, where maybe it was the groundswell, the foundational floor for the sort of neo-noir, cool criminal genre that Tarantino definitely, you gotta, I refuse to believe there's not some connection there. I mean, thinking about how you've got Thief and Manhunter in the 80s, and then you've got Pulp Fiction coming out a year before Heat, right? But somewhere in the midst of all this, even though, you know, we've already established The Keep, there's machine guns and stuff in that, right? So it's post-American Revolution. It's not frontier. It's not Native American, French and Indian War, British colonial politics. This movie is not one, if you were just throwing darts at a board, that you would imagine would wind up in the same collection of Michael Mann's films. And at the same time, looking back with older eyes, it's easy to see that that is definitely why this movie resonated with me. This movie I saw when I was in 8th grade, did not see it in the theaters, regret not seeing it in the theaters, and it's one of those ones that, like, when I think about it, I rented it and I watched the hell out of it. I think I rented it more than once. And I rented it at a time where 8th grade was like a U.S. history. That was sort of where we were in the progression. I'm trying to think of, you know, it's like sort of, it was social studies in the 6th grades, and I covered a lot. Sort of European history. 7th grade was definitely still European history, but once we hit 8th grade, it was like we were in the U.S. history. And this movie in particular came out on video around the time we were starting to discuss like the French and Indian War leading into the Revolutionary War. And I remember I so want to name drop, but I'm not going to. It's just going to be a mystery for any of the folks who listen to this who actually grew up with me in Tenafly, New Jersey at this time period, who might have been going to the middle school, might have been in 8th grade, and might have had one of the 2 U.S. history teachers at that time. It was sort of lucky that I'd seen this movie, but also not, because there was this one day I did not do the reading, and my schedule worked out so that my U.S. history class was like the second to last period of the day. The last period of the day I had English/creative writing, so that was a great way to end the day for me. But I had to get through this, which I actually wound up liking this class a lot, but at first it was a little bit of like an intimidatingly like, oh, this is going to be some thick material, and the teacher seems a little demanding, a little intense, a little gonna hold you responsible, right? And when you're in 8th grade, you haven't really matured to realizing that that's just gonna build character that I wish I had. You know, it was definitely, I remember he introduced us to the SQ3R method of studying, where you had to survey what you're reading, you know, read the first paragraph or the first sentence of every paragraph and get a sense of, actually no, I'm saying wrong. That's not what it was supposed to. You're supposed to read your homework, like all the assigned reading in this class, you were supposed to read it at least twice, and the first read is the survey read, and then for each section you're supposed to come up with SQ3R. Q3 was 3 questions. Oh, no. Survey, questions, then 3 responses. Okay, so you're supposed to... We're supposed to be talking about Last of the Mohicans, and it's such a well-done period piece that I'm talking about my U.S. history class. It all makes sense in a minute. So you had to survey, come up with questions, and then come up with 3 responses for each question. It was a very intense methodology of reading and taking notes, but he wanted to do it to make sure that we all understood what we read, and hence this particular day, and it was, I think I had watched Last of the Mohicans the night before even, And I ran into the guy after lunch. I'm in the restroom. He comes in the restroom and he's like, hey, you're in my later class, aren't you? So this was beginning of the year. It's like maybe September, October. And I'm like, yeah, 7th period. And he's like, how'd you do with that homework last night? Now, I hadn't done it yet. And I had a little time. My plan was to read it during my next period. And I was like, oh, yeah, great. It was really, really good. And he goes, okay, so who won the French and Indian War? And I go, the French. And he's like, the French won the French and Indian War? And I'm like, yeah, didn't they? And he's like, I think you might have misunderstood that reading. And I was like, yeah, gotcha. All right, I got to go. And I just booked it out of there, and I made sure to read. I did at least the survey level first read, so that by the time I got to class in 7th period, I totally realized how stupid I sounded. But it was just one of those things where I was like, what the, dude, I'm taking a leak right now. This is bathroom time in between other classes that I'm in right now that aren't yours. And technically, I have until your class today to get that done. That became a time management approach to life that was prominent in the town that I grew up in. In any case, somehow that memory is pretty hardcore tied to The Last Mohicans, because then during that class he was like saying like, okay, and I think he was like, so Dave, who won the French and Indian War? And I'm like, okay, it wasn't the French. I was like, actually somehow the British held on to the colonies only to get then, booted from within. And he's like, good, I guess you reread that. And I'm like, uh-huh. And then he was like, did anybody else get anything from the reading? He's like, come on, guys, you know this. This is Last of the Mohicans, running around with muskets and cannon fire. And I'm like, oh, yeah. That's why there were so many tribes that spoke French, that were speaking French to the French troops in the movie. So Daniel Day-Lewis, this was like a major introductory piece to. I was a little too young for My Left Foot. Like, I remember seeing the trailers, but I was definitely not open-minded enough to watch movies like that and appreciate them at that time. So this was my introduction to Daniel Day-Lewis. And man, I mean, this movie, Dances with Wolves was awesome, and it's longer than this movie, but this movie had such a level of like badassness to the characters that would then be more present in like the later films that I grew up with, like, with Heat, and when I would go back then and watch Manhunter and Thief, and you would notice these sort of motifs of these just like really expert level characters, like masters of whatever craft it is that they do, but also just like take no shit badasses. And that's what Nathaniel was, aka Hawkeye. So he is the American-born adopted son of Chingachgook, who is literally the last. He and his son Uncas are the last two people in the Mohican tribe, right? Like, that is it. When these guys go, if Uncas doesn't have any kids, they're done. And so that's why the movie is called The Last of the Mohicans, and it's based on the James Fenimore Cooper novel, which a lot of people would have had to have read in their English class at some point, most likely in this age range, middle schoolish, 6th through 7th grade possibly. I don't know if that's still the case. It's shocking these days, the things that you find out they're not doing anymore in school, like learning. And so this was a classic piece of Americana. And in any case, so Last Mohicans, Daniel Day-Lewis, he's like the white, member of the family, and then his brother is full Mohican, and his father is like a Mohican elder. His father wields this crazy ancient weapon. It almost looks like something out of like American Gladiators. Definitely something that, at one point they were running around using these things in warfare, and it was just like brutal times. And we open the movie with them tracking a deer through the woods, and they kill it. So the thing about this movie is really, really epic action sequences, and they're bisected by long sections of dialogue and period accurate dialects and accents. So first viewing in the 7th, 8th grade range, I was sort of like bored by some of the movie and then like completely engrossed in some of the movie. And it was like that kind of like, and plus the score of this film, which I believe was Trevor Rabin, epic, well-known, and the like a very prominent piece that is played throughout. It's reprised throughout, but it really comes into play heavily in the big final sequence. The promontory or the gale. Actually, recently, just earlier today, I actually discovered a guitar quartet called 40 Fingers, and they play it on their Guitar Rhapsody live album. They play this by itself, and then they have another version where they start the sound of silence and it builds into the promontory, and it's just so awesome. I mean, like, I remember this was back in the day where it was sort of like guys were more attracted to movies like this while the girls in the class really weren't so into it. But then when I got to college, there were girls in my class in college who were like, oh my god, I love Last of the Mohicans, because it also is a love story. There's so much going on, and I'm barely scratching the surface. So we have these three, the Last of the Mohicans. They're sort of just making their trek. I think they're on their way to Kentucky, or as they call it, Kentucky. Early, I mean, this is way before there were even states beyond a certain point in the U.S., right? And in their travels, they come across a regiment of British soldiers who are going from one fort in Albany to another fort in upstate New York, who are ambushed by a group of Huron Indians or natives under the sort of generalship or leadership of this one amongst them called Magua, played by Wes Studi, who also, he's the bridge actor-wise to Dances with Wolves, because he played the Pawnee War Chief in Dances with Wolves. So we got used to seeing him in a villain role. He then appears again in Heat, actually. He's on Al Pacino's Detective Squad in Heat. So yeah, Wes Studi, badass. He also played Geronimo, so he was a very big Native American actor throughout the 90s, who capitalized huge on playing characters from, within his ethnicity, his heritage, but not doing so in sort of he wasn't just like cheesy, and it wasn't just like typecast because of his race. He was legit, and he was horrifying. Like, he was very scary in Dances with Wolves, scary in Last of the Mohicans as well, but like had more dialogue, had actual dialogue in English, and you kind of felt for him. All the characters are complex and multifaceted in this film. So obviously I was a little too young to appreciate that at the time, but watching it now, it's definitely a movie that is in such heavy regular rotation, like all of Michael Mann's films for me. But it's the kind of movie that there are some days you're just like, man, I just need to watch Last of the Mohicans. I need to see. There's something about Daniel Day-Lewis's character that is so representative of like a time so far gone by that it's almost hard to believe it ever existed. But it's sort of like he represents such a quintessential goodness, like a natural hero archetype, like almost purity hero archetype, like ancient Jedi level before Disney destroyed any semblance of respectability of the Star Wars franchise. And so they come upon this group, this regiment of British soldiers who are being attacked and slaughtered by the Huron natives, and they wind up rescuing a few people, and two of the people happen to be these young women who are the daughters of one of the British generals, and they were accompanying this regiment to the fort where their father is, and they were being sort of protected by their friend Major Duncan Hayward, who they're basically the only three to survive because the Mohicans came across them, and they agree to shepherd them the rest of the way to the fort. So you have Duncan and Cora Monroe and Alice Monroe. We see, we got establishing scenes for both of these camps, right? So we saw the guys, the Mohicans, we saw them tracking a deer and hunting a deer. We also see them interacting with colonials who will be joining the militia heading to the same fort, and they they obviously we're staying out of the politics, we're staying out of what's going on here, we're just on our way to Kentucky, leave us alone. But we're friends with some of these frontier folks, and the frontier folks are, we'll let them come and stop on their way, hey, if you're ever in the area, stop in and we'll have some food and play field hockey and whatever. And so in their travels, they come across the cabin that we saw them at the beginning, and it's been all burned out. So we know that there's more going on in the area than the British are aware of. There's a Huron war party working with French troops. So the French has aligned with the Native American tribes in America to try to basically oust the British and do what the British were going to do. I mean, they were going to colonize the whole area too, but they just wanted to just kick the British out, and they wouldn't do it. So we all could have been speaking French for a while here too. And so that's the establishment of our Mohican characters, the last thereof. And then we had, this really incredible, I think one of the most iconic shots in the whole movie is there's this bridge, and it's over a river, and the water is like pure smooth surface glass at the beginning of this shot. So it almost looks like this weird, you see the bridge reflected, and you don't really realize what you're looking at until people start crossing the bridge and the music cue kicks in. But until then, it's kind of this frozen moment where you're like, okay, this bridge is up and down, what's going on here? I don't know if anybody else feels that way. That's a scene that has always stood out to me. So from a filmmaking perspective, there's a lot in this movie to be studied as far as technique and craft go. I even, in one of the behind the scenes videos that I watched on YouTube today, Madeleine Stowe, who plays Cora Monroe, she described Michael Mann as a general when he was marshaling all the troops to make this film. He was very much in control, had a total vision for the whole thing, completely understood every moment from every angle, and that Daniel Day-Lewis was very much his soldier. Mostly because Daniel Day-Lewis, as a method actor, very known for literally transforming into the characters he's playing, and in order to play this character, he had to go through several months of survivalist training, weapons training, also had to bulk up, he had to put on muscle mass, and almost like the way Daniel Boone, famous American folklore character, actual figure, living person, would be able to go out and live off the land for 6 months at a time, 9 months at a time, totally fine. They needed sort of survivalists to be able to teach Daniel Day-Lewis to kind of be at that same level, and he's somebody who had no experience firing weapons of any kind. And it's interesting because they trained him with all these modern weapons first, and then he moved to the muskets and the black powder rifles, and also hand-to-hand combat with hatchets and machetes and knives. It is wild, and the combat in the movie, the choreography, everything about it is it's very pre-John Wick. You could see that John Wick took notes from this, or at least maybe not directly, but the folks who made John Wick obviously saw this movie amongst the other catalog of films in their history. In any case, I keep getting away from the opening where you learn that Duncan has been in love with Cora for a long time. They've known each other for a long time. They've been friends since childhood, and he off screen has asked her to marry him, and we come in at her rejecting him. Which has to just be super awkward, because now he has to shepherd her and her younger sister to the fort. They get attacked, they get saved by these guys, and of course Daniel Day-Lewis is Superman, macho badass, and of course Cora Monroe is all kind of drooling over Daniel Day-Lewis, which only makes Duncan Hayward, I will IMDb this while I'm talking in the background, hate him more, which then leads to sort of later moments of betrayal. I'm kind of glad I mentioned the whole thing about them coming across the cabin, because once they finally do get to the Fort William Henry, the folks that they are friends with that we saw in the beginning are there as the militia, and they're saying to him, like, hey guys, the dude whose house we were kind of chilling at the beginning of the movie, yeah, it's burnt up, your wife's dead. All the folks that are still out there on the frontier are totally at risk and unprotected because their men are all here in the fort fighting. Stephen Waddington would be the guy who played Duncan Hayward, by the way. You may know him from such films as he's the Scotsman in Uncharted. I didn't realize that. Oh, I was not a fan of that Uncharted movie. Let's see, we have to go back. Where would we notice him from? Lots of British stuff. Well, anyway, we'll come back to that one. I noticed one that jumps out at me as like, oh yeah, this was a popular film. I guess I just know this guy as Duncan from Last of the Mohicans. He was also in 1492, Conquest of Paradise. That one's a tough watch. Oh man, this guy not doing too much for me here. Sleepy Hollow. He played Killian in Sleepy Hollow. Okay, anyway, let's get off this tangent. They get there and they tell Colonel Monroe, hey, General Webb, who sent this militia to you, made a promise to them that if their homes were being attacked, or if they needed to protect their homes on the frontier, that they would be allowed to leave the fort and go do that. And of course, he doesn't want to let them, because they are under siege by French forces. And all of this, you find out Magua is working, or was basically on sort of secret assignment from the French general. And of course, Magua leapt at the opportunity because he knows Monroe, the gray hair as he calls him, the old man Monroe, who's responsible in a past that happened way before the movie started. I don't know if they cover it in the novel. I imagine they must, in a flashback of some kind. The current General Monroe is responsible for Magua's family being slaughtered at some point, and so now Magua is out for revenge. So his revenge is going to include not only killing Monroe, but killing his daughters, so that his seed is wiped from the earth. So you're with me so far. A lot of complex characters, a lot of deep-seated, emotionally driven motivation. And meanwhile, our characters, the last of the Mohicans, who didn't want to have anything to do with any of this, are pulled in so many ways. So they get to stay at the fort for a little while. There's this amazing sequence where they tell the general, he thinks there's no way they're going to be able to get reinforcements. He was actually expecting reinforcements. He'd actually sent word to his daughters to not come to the fort because they were basically on the verge of being overrun. And Magua killed those couriers, so that message didn't make it. And he took the place of one of those couriers to convince Webb to still send the troops that he was going to then have slaughtered. All of this to make sure that Monroe loses at the fort. Are you following me? And so Hawkeye, aka Nathaniel, aka Daniel Day-Lewis, they say, hey, listen, General Webb is at Fort I'm suddenly blanking on the fort, but he's not as far. He's not in Albany. He's at Fort something, which is only 12 miles away instead of 2 days away. So they decide, well, we're going to send another courier. And meanwhile, the French people know, and Magua knows they're going to send another courier. So there's this badass sequence with really cool music too, where they've loaded. Nathaniel and his brother Uncas have 4 rifles each lined up along the wall. They're on top of the fort. They're all loaded and ready to go, and they let this courier run out of the fort door, and he's running through the woods, and all of these like French and Huron warriors are jumping out to like kill the guy, and they're sniping them, so that like they just tell the guy, just run. Like, we don't see this all happens off camera. And that's the beauty part of the Michael Mann approach of filmmaking, where it's like, listen, dude, I'm not spoon feeding you. I'm not going to show you everything. We're going to give you a sense of what's going to happen. You're going to watch it unfold, and you're going to have to put some of these things together yourself. We don't see them prep the courier. We don't see them make this plan. We just know that they're going to send the courier. So the courier's job is just to run, not stop running. Even though someone's jumping out of the woods at you with a hatchet, literally about to chop your head off, don't worry. Your boy Hawkeye, a.k.a. Nathaniel, a.k.a. Daniel Day-Lewis, is about to blow that dude away. And so, like, 6 or 7 of these, like, you know, soldiers slash spies slash, you know, bad guys, a.k.a. bad guys, quote-unquote bad guys, almost get this dude. And these guys are just sniping one after the other. It is epic, epic, epic. And so, like, this movie... early days of film aficionado, this kind of defined like uber badass, super confident, no doubt in their minds they were going to save that dude, no doubt in their minds no matter what is happening to them, no matter how many times the tide turns against them, they are going to be okay. As I was watching it earlier, there are moments in this where the bad guys definitely seem like they're winning, you know, like Magua captures the Monroe daughters, and Nathaniel helped some of the militia people leave the fort after the general said they couldn't leave, and now he's going to be hung for sedition. And Cora Monroe, this is also after they've had like a little bit of a meet cute slash affair type situation, and even the militia guys were like, hey, aren't you going to come with us? He goes, no, I've got a reason to stay. And they're like, I see what's going on here. And she comes to him while he's locked up and says, why didn't you leave when you had the chance? And he said, because what I'm interested in is right here. It's like, dude, I don't even know players and ballers today that can be that just direct. It's almost off-puttingly awkward how direct he is. Yeah, in fact, there's like this really awesome part where he like just stops and looks at her, and she kind of looks away and then looks back at him and says, what are you looking at, sir? And he says, I'm looking at you. And you're just like, dude, wow, dude. And then, so of course, the fort falls, the French take it over, and the French agree to let the British leave. He just says, you know, tell me you will send these soldiers home so that they don't fight in America anymore, and I will let you leave. He's like, please don't fight to the last. Don't needlessly have your soldiers die just to protect this fort. And so Monroe agrees. Meanwhile, then the French general tells Magua, hey, we're letting them go. My rulers told me to let them go, but, you know, I'm just going to wind up fighting them again when I get to Albany. So if you and your boys want to take them out on the road, that's your shot, man. Monroe will be there, his daughters will be there. You could do the whole thing where you take out the gray hair and put his seed under the knife so that it's wiped from the earth for good. So the whole time now, as I'm talking about this, I keep going like, man, all they wanted to do was go to Kentucky. They just wanted to go to Kentucky, and now they're prisoners of war. They're trapped, traversing the plain or the wilderness with British soldiers, and they wind up getting again ambushed by Magua's like posse. And there's even there's some crazy scene, like, you know, Madeleine Stowe is no like peaked little like fragile character. She's picking up guns and killing people. Her sister, though, is the sort of sheltered one. You could see was never she was going to be more the traditional, like, she's somebody that like if Duncan had fallen in love with her, would have been perfect. Instead, no, he picked the strong-willed daughter of the general, who's definitely going to be gravitating more towards a guy like Hawkeye, a.k.a. Nathaniel, a.k.a. Daniel Day-Lewis. Much more of an alpha. Not even an alpha, just like a self-sufficient. Like, you know, you can't say terms like alpha now without it being loaded. And so they survive, they get away. During the whole commotion, she almost gets executed. General Monroe does get executed, but then their escape caused them to, like, all their gunpowder is wet. They're hiding in a waterfall, and they realize, you know, we don't have any ability to fight, and they are eventually going to find us, and if they do, I don't know what we're going to do. And he says to, you know, Daniel Day-Lewis, after arguing with his brother and his father about what the plan is, she says, no, go. Like, she realizes, she gets it, she's hip to what's going on. She goes, get out of here, you've done everything you can. He goes, if we leave, there's a chance there won't be a fight, and if they don't kill you instantly, they'll take you north to the Huron lands. And he says, you submit, do you hear? You survive, you're strong, you stay alive. I will find you no matter what occurs, no matter how long it takes, no matter how far. You're like, dudes, you guys met like a week ago. Oh my god. So yeah, this is like Titanic, that level of love story, except it had so much action that you could see why Titanic was the one that was the sort of the more gravitated towards by the romance crowd. But this, I mean, like, this is one of these movies that when I watch now, I go, I guess at times in my life have felt like I felt that way about other people, but obviously since I'm not with them anymore, maybe it wasn't to this level. And that's the other thing, it's sort of reminiscent of a time when all of life was so much more innocent and simple, where, like, there was no internet, there were no cell phones, there were no dating apps, there was no swiping. If you found yourself feeling like this about another human being, you're also living out in the harsh wilderness of an unsettled new country. Your life expectancy wasn't in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. You know, you getting to 40, getting to 50 was like, that was old. And so it was kind of like you would be lucky to have this kind of connection with somebody. So, yeah, man, kudos to Michael Mann for making a movie that's like badass and also a love story and also a period piece and also a war epic. And yeah, definitely, I remember I was at a Halloween party and I was talking to the boyfriend of one of my youngest sister's good friends growing up. She grew up on our block, so she was like a family friend. And every once in a while, the guys would commiserate about movies that we all love that our female counterparts didn't seem to have any interest in. And I, for sure, the woman I was going out with at the time, it was the same boat. And not only that, there's another guy, Byron, who is one of the people from the accounting world where I had been a corporate video person for a long time. Like at a conference, it was the same thing. Like there were always a handful of movies that would come up, be like, I don't know, man. I mean, I like her, but it's like the only time I can watch some of these things is if she already goes to sleep or she's out with her friends. I actually prefer for her to go out just so I could like watch like Last of the Mohicans. And I remember both my sister's friend's boyfriend and this guy Byron were like, oh my god, yeah, my girl doesn't like Last of the Mohicans either. And I'm just like, it's a fucking love story. Like, what's not to like about it? But you know, it's funny. These are phenomena that seem to be going the way of the dodo these days. So, in any case, this was a really interesting reminiscence on the Last of the Mohicans. I'm sort of leaving out the sort of big chase scene at the end where so after the waterfall thing, Magwa's got the girls and he's going to take them up to the Huron lands. There's a whole little to-do up there, and he winds up being told to take one of them. They were going to burn the other alive, but instead Duncan sort of sacrifices himself, says, take me for her. And now Uncas has actually fallen in love with Alice, Cora's younger sister, and so she's being taken by Magua, and he's going off on his own. He's been disgusted by his own people. He's like, that's it, I'm taking my crew, we're just gonna go venture out on our own. And so he wants to save Alice. Like, most of the movie has been multiple times of Nathaniel saving Cora, so now Uncas is like, alright, I'm gonna go try and save Alice. Oh my god. It leads to this epic battle on a cliff where the promontory, the gale, or whatever you want to call it, a lot of us just call it the theme to Last of the Mohicans, it's almost like this is the sequence I watch the whole movie to get to every single time. Like, I love the whole movie, but every single time I put it on, it's in my mind is like I'm basically going through the motions of going through the rest of it to get to this chase/battle scene at the end of the movie. And I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to totally spoil it for you, but let's just say nobody does action like this the way Michael Mann does. And it is an absolute treasure and a treat. And once you've experienced it, if you haven't experienced it yourself, not only will the piece of music stay with you and become part of your sort of genetic makeup, but you will understand why this movie is as beloved and treasured as it is by those who experienced it when they were young, who got it into their movie fandom genetic makeup early in the process. So yeah, a little period piece for you this week. We shall return again next time with another selection. Until then, I think we're just about out of break time. It's time to finish up that water cooler water and the damn fine cup of coffee. And yeah, I will see you next time at the movies.
You've been listening to the Hollow9ine Network, bringing you the very best in fan-made media. That's the word hollow, the number 9, I-N-E. Find the Hollow9ine Network on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Rate and review us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts. Email us at hollow9podcast@gmail.com. Leave us your feedback. Join in the conversation and be a part of the action. Join in the fun. Hollow9ine.